So welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today Damien Dumar is back, and we are going to talk a little bit about the GirKu Chronicles, the Maystone, and we are also going to address some questions that have been left. So, welcome, Damien. Welcome back. Um, is it okay with you when we start with a couple of questions? It's only two, anyhow.
Certainly, go right
Okay.
ahead. Thank you for having me on again.
So there is one question was, where do you get your facts from?
That's a good question. I would respond by first asking if the person asking the question read the book. I am of the impression they have not read the book because they're asking a question like this. So the
Mhm.
answer to that is that, first of all, we have to look at the fact that the last harvest can be divided in a certain sense into two parts. One part of it would be what we would call the galactic history. It deals with topics such as extraterrestrials, angels and demons, all these very salacious topics and speculative topics, or at least topics that would be classified as speculative. And then the other half of the book has to do with topics that are not speculative. For example, the intention of the elite on this planet to eliminate 90% of the human population. And
Mhm.
that half of the book is all based not on the words of Lucien Mars, the author, but rather on quotes from our leaders, from the elite themselves, actual laws that are in place. So, for example, at the end of the last harvest, we list all the NASA laws governing extraterrestrial contact. And to summarize, basically, if you are in contact with extraterrestrials, you are, on a federal level, a criminal, and you are subject to indefinite imprisonment, and your fate becomes solely at the discretion of various NASA officials. So the question that would arise from that would be, well, do aliens exist? Well, if they didn't exist, why are laws like this being put on the books by NASA on the federal level? So
Mhm.
many of the statements that are in the latter half of the book, which cover the events that are immediately impacting you as the reader, they're all based on quotes and are footnoted and can be looked up and cross-referenced and confirmed as factual. So, as a simple example, if someone said, well, who in the elite would want to reduce the population by 90%? There's a quote in the book from CNN founders Ted Turner, and he says, quote, a total population of 250 to 300 million and 95% decline from present levels would be ideal, end quote. And that's just one of many, many, many. As far as the earlier part of the book that details galactic history, that naturally falls into the category of what most people would dub as speculative, because it is very hard to prove it in a way that would be acceptable to the population at large. However, with that being said, the answer to your question is that much of this information was extracted from a GirKu Chronicle, which is a historical document, for lack of a better word, or perhaps archive would be a better word, that is encoded upon a maystone, which is a type of holographic crystal, which is not indigenous to this planet, but actually comes from another part of the universe and is used for things such as data storage, weaponry, things of that nature. So the author, Lucien Mars, he had access to one of these GirKu Chronicles that was uncorrupted. If this sounds a little bit foreign, one has to realize that a lot of the other works on this sort of subject matter also drew their information from similar sources. For example, the work of Robert Morningsky, who was a Native American elder who told a lot of stories also about the early Siakar reptilian empire when it was known as the Orion or the Aryan Empire. He got his information from one of these holographic crystals that was given to him by an alien pilot who had crashed his spacecraft on a Native American reservation. And
Mhm.
there are other sources out there which I won't quote because they are so highly corrupted, but nonetheless speak on information that has been also taken from one of these GirKu chronicles. The issue often is that when someone is able to access one of these holographic crystals, the crystal often can be corrupted or damaged, or the person interpreting it may not have a clear channel to be able to access the information. And so the information becomes very corrupted or integrated with the person's own biases. So that would be the short answer as to where the information in the last harvest that would be classified as speculative comes from. However, what I find is that when people read it, the information is so much, so dense, and all 100% brand new, not recycled, never heard before, that when someone is inundated with this flood of information, their brain puts it together in a certain structure where they see that this is actually the most plausible explanation for what is going on. And it ties together so many loose ends in what we would call the conspiracy theory UFO arena, because that arena naturally is also filled with a lot of disinformation that is injected into that arena by groups such as the Nebu Gray, who wish to conceal from you certain truths or to distort certain truths, which would be in their favor.
Mhm. So there is one question that I have. So if, okay, you said Lucien Mars had access to the Maystone, but
Correct.
how did he acquire that? Was it given to him? Did he find it? Did he search actively? Do you know that?
Well, he is a part of the reptilian Siakar empire, so he has access to this sort of information. Of
Mm.
course, I recognize when I respond to your question in this manner that a lot of people may roll their eyes and say, okay, sure, fine. And that naturally is an issue whenever one broaches the subject of that which would be classified as speculative, which is, well, I can easily prove to you with quotes from books and references that the United States government, for example, has enough FEMA concentration camps that they could easily hold 30 million people. That can be looked up and verified. I can go on Amazon right now and pull up a US government military manual that shows you exactly how they intend to run these camps. So that is something that's much easier to quote unquote prove. But when you talk about things such as extraterrestrials, how humanity was created, religious concepts, the divine father, naturally it's very difficult to come up with some sort of quote unquote document that says, here, this proves it.
Mhm.
It's just one of the challenges of being in this realm, that if you don't have experience with extraterrestrials, it's very hard to prove that they exist until, of course, you get abducted or they land on your front lawn or they invade the planet. At that point, everyone says, oh, well, there they are. But until that actually happens, it's very difficult to prove they exist. Even if I had, let's say, video footage, someone could easily say, oh, you made that with today's CGI, which is so advanced. So I'm really in a bit of a bind. And the point is not so much to have to prove this information's veracity to people, but rather to encourage them to read it. And hopefully the truth has a certain veracity all of its own intrinsically that they will just resonate with and say, oh, well, that certainly explains everything.
Mm. Yeah, I guess when it comes to the question of aliens, either your mind is open to the possibility or not. There is not much in between. And
I think that's pretty accurate.
yeah. And okay, so now,
Oh, and
uh,
I would just interject right here for a second that in the last few weeks, in hearings in Congress, we did have, for example, one congresswoman who used to be in the military who openly testified that she is aware of the existence of extraterrestrials, and she has been presented with the data and the proof by the military, and she has stated in agreement with another individual in the US military who testified in Congress about last month that they have indeed recovered crashed alien craft, and they do have the bodies of aliens. So if your own Congress people are testifying in hearings that extraterrestrials exist, I think that's getting much closer to a proof. Although some people could easily look at the situation in Mexico and say, well, those little gray alien mummies, they look like they're made from paper mache. And they very well may be. Certainly, they have not shared these mummies with the rest of the scientific community. As Neil deGrasse Tyson pointed out in a recent interview, where someone can actually run genetic testing on these mummies or do carbon dating. So at this point, we're sort of taking the Mexican government's word for it. However, when it comes to congressional testimony, I think that's a little bit more on point and more valid than other sources.
Mhm. And okay, having the crystal is one thing, but how do you extract the information? Is there a device necessary to do that?
One has to be genetically capable of interfacing with it.
Okay, so practically something that we saw on Stargate Atlantis. You can
Yes, you could
only
say
fly
that.
the ship if you have the genetics of the ancient.
Well, there are a lot of things in science fiction that are not actually fiction. As a matter of fact, I created quite a stir recently on a podcast when I mentioned that George Lucas, who created the Star Wars story, was actually a bit of an insider, knew a thing or two, and lightsabers and Death Stars actually do exist. And this drew a lot of attention from the, how should we say, the science fiction and comic book community.
Hmm. Okay. So, okay, still, how did he extract that information?
Well, like I said, if one is capable of interfacing with it, then it's I think the crudest analogy would say it is it is like combining your consciousness with the consciousness that is inside the Maystone. So
Oh,
it's very easy to access this sort of data. I'm not saying that there isn't technology out there that enables one to get the data off of it in other ways, but in terms of technology that is in this realm that would be available to most beings, that's not something that's very common.
mhm. Okay. Yeah, because I wondered, yeah, that having the stone is one thing,
Yes,
but
of course.
how do you extract the information if
It's a
you're
very good
not,
question.
yeah. So, somebody else complained a little bit that you
I'm sure
didn't
they did.
that you didn't answer the question, who is the divine father? We established last time it is not Yahweh. Um, so does this divine father have a name, or does he only go by divine father? Who exactly is that?
That's a loaded question, and one that I clearly am not able to answer. I think for all practical purposes related to the book, The Last Harvest, we can simply refer to him as the Divine Father and view him as the author of creation itself. So I think that that's probably enough. I'm not sure why someone would be asking a question. Who is he? Like, do they expect him to be? Oh, he's their neighbor George down the block. Like what kind of answer would be expected for a question like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. Still, to me, it's a little bit weird that this divine father appears to have no name. But okay. And
Yeah,
So,
I would also want to point out that the purpose of The Last Harvest, it was not written to create a type of religion or to offer any sort of salvation or anything like this. The purpose of the book was simply to provide humanity with the information of their origins and the galactic history around this planet and their creation and the other extraterrestrials that are players in this space opera of sorts that we all find ourselves living in, whether we are aware of it or not, or whether we accept it or not. And the other reason the book was written was to shine light on exactly what is going on this planet and who is behind it. And as I've said before, the book was authored at the request of the Divine Father. Again, whether someone wishes to believe that or not is entirely up to them and not really relevant to the message that is in the book. And I find that anyone who actually reads the book, and many people have not, but they claim to have read it, or maybe they've read a few pages of it, but anyone who has actually read the book will be in agreement that all of the information is information which they have never heard before. And while the aspect of the book that is speculative cannot necessarily be proven in the sense that a lot of human beings would like, quote unquote, a proof, it certainly makes an enormous amount of sense. It answers a lot of questions which may not even have been answered. And the latter part of the book, which is not speculative, but very much grounded in actual quotations and documents that are easily verifiable, is information, again, that finally ties together all of the conspiracies that are theoretical out there and say, okay, well, which ones are factual and how do they apply to you? So I know that the book, again, has a very dark message because it talks about this idea of the Nebu Gray extraterrestrials being in control of this planet and orchestrating a genocide of most of the human population and then hybridizing the rest in an attempt to take control of the planet. I understand that when someone first hears this, again, they look at it and they say, wow, that sounds pretty out there. But when one reads the book and one sees all of the facts and quotes, one starts to shift one's opinion a little bit, even if one is the type of individual who really likes to have their head in the sand and say, there's something going on here. At the very least, it becomes very clear when reading The Last Harvest that even if you don't believe in this, the elite who run this planet do believe in it. So the Bill Gates, the Elon Musks, the Illuminati, those who gather at Bohemian Grove, those who are at the Bilderberg seminars, they all believe it to be true. So even if it's not, they are still acting as if it is, and your lives are still very much in danger.
mhm. Okay. So if you say it was written more or less because the Divine Father wished to do so, um, okay, so the information is out there, but it feels to me as if there is no way out given. So can you understand that somebody looks at this and feels like, what is this for? You're just rubbing it into my face, that it's a done deal. And why are you informing us if there's nothing that we can do to prevent it? You know what I mean? It has a strange vibe to it.
Well, I think the strange vibe is simply that if someone came to you and said that you only have 2 weeks left to live, you probably would be very agitated and say, well, why did you tell this to me? Now I can't enjoy those 2 weeks. Whereas another individual with a different sort of point of view would say, wow, thank you for letting me know that I only have 2 weeks left to live. Now I can definitely live those 2 weeks as authentically as possible. These are just different perspectives. So you may have this perspective and others may, and I completely understand why you would have that perspective, but others do not have that perspective. Others look at it very differently. So I think when you look at the planet, there are billions of people, and a certain percentage will look at this material if exposed to it a certain way. Others will look at it another way.
Yeah, okay. Um, but yeah, I don't want to go into that question again, why he doesn't give a shit. Um, obviously he doesn't, and you know, honestly, when I look at the role of this Divine Father, it doesn't gel with me. To me, it feels like another imposter God.
Well, you certainly, we've sort of went into this territory before in the last interview, and I would rather not continue to go into that direction. Certainly anyone, human beings have free will, and they're entitled to react whichever way they would like to this material, or have whatever feelings they have on it. But I can't really speak to any of that. I think anyone who has these sorts of feelings or questions, I think this is really something for them to bring up with their creator and the divine father. I'm not the individual to be
Yeah.
necessarily venting this to, because there's no response I could have to it. I view things very differently, and so it would just be like I'm sitting here as a sounding board, as opposed to having a dialogue about the book or the message that's behind the book.
Yeah.
So you see my position on that thing.
hmm Okay. So last time, after uh, after recording, we talked a little bit, and I don't know if you can recall this, but I asked you if you are looking forward to these events. And your answer was, I'm just happy to get out of here. Do you remember?
I don't recall the actual conversation, but if you wanted um, to talk about how, let's say, compared to your reaction to the book, my reaction to the book, uh, I have a very different spiritual mindset than perhaps some other people, and I'm not the type of individual who was ever very, I guess you could say, attached to life. Uh, I don't mean that in the sense that I am depressed or that I am suicidal or that I don't enjoy my life. I just
More like the
accept.
Buddhist view?
I wouldn't even put it into any. I'm not really sure what the Buddhist view is. I wouldn't, so I can't say if it is or isn't. I would simply say that I am. I accept. I live my life in such a way that I have no problem if suddenly it were to come to an end. And I
Mm.
have known other individuals like this. Just as an anecdotal story that is personal that pops into my mind. I had a friend who one day he was told that he had a pulmonary embolism, and if they didn't do an operation, he would die. And he said, "That's fine. Don't do the operation. I'd rather not go through that. If I die, I die." And he was totally comfortable with his life, and he lived life very well, and he enjoyed it. And he was very young, only 35, and he really truly lived. And perhaps due to the fact that he truly lived, he, for whatever reason, did not have any issue with dying. So again, a lot of these reactions really come down to a personal level. So while I don't remember exactly what the conversation was, I can tell you that from my point of view, I'm very accepting of what the Divine Father's will is. And again, I would suggest, and some of you may cringe at this idea because you have a personal axe to grind with the Creator, but my view would be that one should always be reaching out to the Creator, and you don't need religion to do that, and to acknowledge his existence, and to acknowledge that he is your creator, regardless of what you may feel about him, and that it would behoove one, or would be very wise, to establish a relationship with him that is productive as opposed to counterproductive, because certainly creation requires balance. And in the King James Version of the Bible, it's very clear that the Divine Father created both light and dark for the purposes of his creation and to facilitate balance. And so I feel that every type of being can play a role in that creation that's working in alignment with his will as opposed to against it. This, of course, requires a certain amount of spiritual maturity, in my opinion, that one has to, I suppose you could say, surrender one's pride or ego to some degree, which is a topic that is often talked about in many religions. And some beings will do that and others won't. It's again in alignment with their free will. The Divine Father didn't create a clockwork, he created a creation. And for those who wish to rebel against him, well, you're in good company with Satan and many other beings who probably share those same feelings. But again, that's a free will choice, and free will choices have consequences. So I don't want to really dwell on the idea of the Divine Father too much. My idea, I only bring that up so that people understand, again, a frame of reference as to where this book came from, because it is a very valid question that one would say, well, why was this book written? So I'm going to give you an honest answer. But if you don't like my honest answer, I really can't say much except go talk to the boss yourself. I'm not in a position to speak for him in that regard. So what I would rather focus on is what is going on in this book. And there's certainly, while there may be nothing you can do to prevent this dark ending, there's certainly things you can do to make sure that your ending is not dark. That one thing people could do, for example, if they wish to delay things, is if they got together and they got the United States government, for example, to repeal all of the executive orders and to dissolve all the FEMA camps, this would certainly be a step in the right direction, because there is always this aspect of free will. So sometimes people would say, well, why don't the Galactic Federation or other extraterrestrials come and help? So one of the many reasons why that is the case is because human beings consistently do not use their free will in such a way to demonstrate that they're willing to take responsibility for what goes on around them. And this is something we see over and over in life. And again, this is not me passing judgment on people. It is just my observation. And it's as clear as day to anyone who is honest with themselves. It's very easy for someone to talk or complain about anything there is, but to actually do something about it and change, that's a whole different kettle of fish, so to speak.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue there with you. I agree. A huge chunk of humanity has a very childish attitude. And they like to be told what to do. The last 3 years have probably proven that, in case there was any doubt. So, yeah, and that is, to me, very, very irritating. Yeah. The laziness, when it comes to your own freedom and well-being, the laziness not to stand up. I agree with that. Yet, on the other hand, that to me is not a justification to annihilate something.
Okay, well, I hear what you're saying. I can't comment on this really, other than say I hear what you're saying. I understand your feelings. I don't agree with them, but again, my purpose in promoting this book and publishing it is not to convince anyone of anything.
Yeah.
My whole mission here is simply to present this information. And once someone has been presented with the information, how they choose to react to it is their choice. I saw a review on Amazon for the book where someone was rather upset with the content in the book and had complaints with it, yet still gave the book a 5-star review because the book is that good. So again, someone may not like the message, but you can't throw the message in the garbage when the message is based on truth and fact.
Mm-hmm. So why then? Do you have any idea why the Divine Father wanted to have this book released? What was exactly the purpose of that?
I don't
You don't know.
I don't ask
So
these sorts of questions. If this is what he desires, then that's what he gets. Again, this is the difference between myself and other people.
uh,
Other people, they have their own particular, I guess, level of wisdom or how they view things, and this is how I am as a being. I am obedient, and I uh, I acknowledge the Divine Father as my creator, and what he wants is what he will get. And I acknowledge that his wisdom is that he's a perfect being, and that his wisdom is uh, superseded by no one's. And again, this is my personal uh, stance. If someone else doesn't have that stance, that's fine. It's fine by
mhm.
me. I am not a again. I don't sound like a broken record, but I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. And I can see that you're very stuck on this idea that there's a tremendous amount of resentment that you have against your creator. And if that's something that you wish
I
to,
don't have any resentment against my creator. I just don't accept any idea that people present to me and tell me that is your creator. I
okay,
absolutely have no resentment against my creator.
okay, well, perhaps I'm picking up on incorrectly. Well, if you don't accept that there's a creator, that's
I
totally
do
fine.
accept that. I do accept that. But I
So
also think that none of our religions really present that.
that's correct. The last harvest goes into great detail about where religions came from, who created them, and the primary objective of religion is to create a separation from human beings and the Divine Father, to sort of
Mm,
place this religious intermediary there in order to create conflict and division and war. But when you
mhm,
speak to me, you what I keep hearing over and over is this idea that you have an issue with how the Divine Father runs his creation. This is what I'm picking up on. So when you're saying that you accept that he exists, but you don't accept the way he's running things. This is what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
picking
as
up
I
on.
said, well, what you are presenting to me, that is an imposter. Sorry. Um,
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if
so,
again,
so my,
I will not argue this point with you. If you feel that way, you feel that way. But again, I think that perhaps you are focusing on the wrong thing, because I think while someone can not accept what I'm saying about the Divine Father, it's very hard to not accept the information that's in the last harvest about what the elite plan to do.
yeah,
So
that I
again,
have no problem with that part.
right.
Absolutely.
If we discount anything in the book that's about extraterrestrials, if we discount anything that I've said about the Divine Father or anything that's about religion in the book, what is still left is an incredible core of factual information about what is facing humanity at this moment on this planet. So
Mhm,
whether you believe that the Nebu Gray are behind the elite, or whether you wish to believe that the Divine Father I'm referencing is an imposter or is authentic, there's still the issue that the elite wish to wipe out 90% of the population. So a
Mhm.
lot of this other information that I mentioned, or that the book, The Last Harvest, talks about the Nebu Gray, for example, is because someone, when they read this information, will ask themselves, as one of the first questions, they will say, well, why would the elite want to commit genocide on 90% of the population? That sounds very extreme. It sounds almost a little bit insane and genocidal, and it is, but there's a reason why they are being motivated to do this, and that is because there is an extraterrestrial influence. So
Mhm.
all of this information is brought in there to give people the complete picture. Again,
Mhm.
as a lot of people, the whole point is to bring this information out there. A lot of people will read this and they will accept it. It will make sense to them. For example, there are many people out there who have had contact with aliens, many people, but no one believes them because it sounds a little bit like they made it up or they smoked too much marijuana or something like this. But those individuals who've had direct experience will have no problem accepting a lot of the information that's in the book. Some people who are closed-minded or who have never had experiences that would be considered paranormal or never seen a flying saucer when they looked up at night, they might say, well, I don't accept that part of the book because there's no proof for it. And that's great, but it doesn't change the fact that all of these forces are out there conspiring against you. So, for example, one of the areas of contention that you have had so far in this conversation with what I have been saying is that you are upset, or you feel that many of your readership will be upset. Well, why is this book presented when there's nothing we can do about it? Yet at the same time, you also will say, well, I feel that the Divine Father, who you are claiming authored this book or requested it to be authored, is an imposter. Well, logically then, if you believe that the Divine Father is an imposter, then you also don't have to accept the fact that you can't change this. So again, if that's
I
actually
absolutely do think that we can change it.
okay, well then if you can, if you feel you can change it, and that is your belief, then again, there's no need to dwell on who is the Divine Father. I think he's an imposter. I don't agree with how he created it, because that's really not what the book is about. The book is about the elite's plan to perpetuate genocide on the planet. So again, if someone feels the way you do about certain things, well, that's even more reason not to feel then that this book is so dark, and to feel the questions such as, well, why was this book written if there's no reason for that? You see the contradiction here, right?
No,
Okay.
absolutely not. Because, I have to believe that you say he is the original creator. So you present that, and that's okay. I can believe that or not, and I chose not to believe it
Right.
because I don't see a lot of yeah, it's
Well, what I'm trying to say here is that
cold.
what I'm trying to say here is that if you feel that you do not believe in the Divine Father and this aspect of the book, then at the same time, there's no need to be upset and say, well, why was this written if there's nothing we can do about it? Because those are in contradiction, because you can't believe there's nothing to do about it at the same time.
No, but I like, with people in authority and with a divine father, I assume that is an authority. Yeah. So um, I expect a little bit of an explanation. Yeah. If if that is the path, how it's going to go down, then I would like to have an explanation why. I always ask question and question everything, and no matter who it is. That is just how I'm wired. I'm sorry.
Well, there's nothing wrong if you wish to ask questions.
Mm,
I cannot answer a lot of the questions that you're asking because they're way outside the scope of what the book is about.
yeah.
And
Okay.
there's
Let's
this, yeah.
let's leave the Divine Father behind. Okay, when let's say you are teleported out before the big showdown. Um, how how do you know it
Well,
will be?
I never said anything about. I don't know where you're getting this information about me
No,
being
because you should be,
teleported out.
because you answered last time and said, "I'm just happy to get out of here."
I
When I
I I I don't recall this, and
okay.
either way, if any of these conversations did occur off camera, it's not appropriate to bring them up on camera because that which may be said off camera is might be personal. For example, if we talk before the show starts and you're telling me something about your personal life, I am not going to bring that up in the middle of the podcast.
Mhm.
I wouldn't do something like that. And so there's an unwritten rule that what one speaks about off camera, pre or post show, is information that one doesn't bring up. So I'm not. I don't recall months ago what our off camera
Okay.
conversation was. But whatever information it was, it's certainly something that is not related to the book material, and it's yeah, and
When this showdown happens, where do you see yourself?
where do I see myself when the showdown
Yeah,
happens?
do you
Well,
expect?
I'm here on this planet now, so I, I'm
Mhm,
I'm I'm pretty certain, unless I get hit by a car before then or something like this, that I will be present when I don't know what you're defining as a showdown, but I would say the unfoldment of these events.
mhm.
Certainly, if World War III is going to start, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to see the start of World War III. Again, it's right.
Okay, but you do not expect to be annihilated, you personally?
Well, I am part of the human population,
Hmm.
so I am going to die. That's inevitable. So
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
whether I die in a worldwide genocide or I'm hit by a car tomorrow, the death can of this physical body can be assured. Yes. So I mean, this
Hmm.
is right.
Hmm. Yeah, of course, we all can die tomorrow, and nobody knows that. But I was just thinking about um, if you personally expect to be among those who will get annihilated. So, do you have any insights what life is like under the, let's say, rulership of Lucifer?
This is
What is daily life like? Do you have any insights?
this is not material that's part of the book or relevant to it. I'm
Okay.
not sure where these questions are going.
Um, um, I w-
This
I
is this is
tried.
this is this is a book that is about what is relevant to human beings, what's going on this planet right now, and this information about Lucifera and this information about the galactic history is there to give context to what is going on this planet. It's not the intention to create a sort of a Wikipedia of alien life just for the sake of entertaining people. That's not what the reason this information was presented in the book. It's like there are people who they they read this book and they just want to talk about Death Stars and lightsabers. And while I totally understand that they may be very excited to learn that these things actually exist, it is just one or two references in the book. And really, when one is looking at global genocide, I don't think that one's time is best served talking about lightsabers, nor what life is like in the reptilian Siakar empire. It's hardly relevant to anyone, and you understand, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just asked because I recently heard an interview from
Okay,
somebody who came out of the Montauk project,
okay,
and he said he was used as a time soldier, and he
mhm,
reported about life on a different planet.
okay,
And interestingly enough, he mentioned that people are living in what we would call 15-minute cities, and that it is for the regular people very, very expensive to go to a restaurant, that it costs almost 13 months of their salary, and that, yeah, let's say the peasants get a paste that is their staple food, some type of paste that is made of insect. And as you know, we have a lot of those developments here as well. So, and when I looked at those developments, and I have said it for quite a while, that a lot of these things that we are seeing here right now is actually an alien agenda, and is not originally has its roots here on this planet. You know what I mean?
yes.
Yeah. So, and that is why I asked if um, there is any information how that, um, how it is structured, society, life there.
Well, I think that it's important to point out that all extraterrestrial civilizations have a centralized form of government. In other words, this idea that we see on planet Earth, where we have X number of countries and they're all at each other's throats, is something that you would not see elsewhere in the universe. That what you will see is always every planet has some sort of, you could say, for lack of a better word, a one world government. Now, this is not the same thing as what you would call quote unquote new world order. It is simply
Hmm.
the idea of having a centralized government that rules on the basis of ability, as opposed to, let's say, on this planet where people rule based on their popularity in an election. So this is um, a big difference, and it is one of the many reasons why extraterrestrial civilizations such as the Galactic Federation don't step in here, because this planet is basically, it's so chaotic. How would you get anyone to agree on anything? And we have, for example, in the last harvest, there's a lot of information about President Eisenhower and how he signed a treaty with the Nebu Gray in order to trade human beings uh, in exchange for antiquated extraterrestrial technology. And this is actually that which started the whole trend of alien abductions, because while Eisenhower gave them the ability to abduct a certain number of individuals for what you would call research purposes, naturally they went way beyond that, and they abducted an enormous amount of people for nefarious purposes. And of course, while the Nebu Gray comes to the United States and makes this deal with Eisenhower, they then secretly go and make a similar parallel deal with Russia. And Russia thinks they have something exclusive, and the United States thinks they have something exclusive, and everything gets infiltrated and becomes a big mess. And this is also an issue here where human beings they allow a president or someone of this nature to make decisions for them en masse, to effectively listen. No one came to you and said, hey, do you approve of this deal? No one even really told you this deal existed until many years later, and you still bear the consequences of these sorts of decisions. Like recently, it was there finally was a report released by the US government that admitted that when they were doing nuclear testing back in the day, they didn't just detonate one nuclear warhead under the ground for safety purposes. They actually detonated close to 100 warheads, and they airburst them. And they did this with no regard for the environment or what the consequences would be. And we see as a result of this is that after all this testing was conducted, cancer rates everywhere started to shoot up because this radiation went into the soil, it went into the ecosystem in general, and it becomes part of the ecosystem, and you are also part of the ecosystem, so it becomes part of you. So this is something that is a result of having a planet which has many different nations on it, ruled by many different leaders, all at odds with each other because each country wishes to develop an advantage over the other nation. And this, incidentally, is one of the things that is driving artificial intelligence as the ultimate vector of depopulation, as the book The Last Harvest points out, because one of the reasons the development of artificial intelligence is pushed forward with no sort of oversight is because every nation in part is worried that if they don't push its development, another nation will push it faster and develop an incredible technological and strategic advantage over the other. So if we had a one world government with a more centralized rulership that was based on merit and ability as opposed to one's popularity in polls, then one could easily see that more wise decisions would be tendered with respect to the development of things such as AI, which will have catastrophic consequences for humans on this planet. Because while The Last Harvest talks about these various vectors of depopulation that work synergistically, such as a nuclear conflict, as in World War III, it talks about famine, it talks about viruses, which is something we're very familiar with given our experiences lately with a virus such as COVID. There's this other issue, which is AI, which trumps all of these vectors of depopulation, because there are two factors here that one has to look at that are very important. And one of them is that it is pretty much well established among experts in artificial intelligence that there's really no reason why an AI system wouldn't turn around and look at human beings and say, I think they should all be done away
Yeah.
with. I think that their genetic material would be better repurposed as something else. And this is one of the biggest dangers of artificial intelligence, which human beings tend to just ignore and think like, oh, it's no big deal. Isn't ChatGPT such a great creation? I don't have to do reports at work for my boss anymore. I just tell ChatGPT to write the report. I edit it. I make a few changes to make it my own. I hand it in and nobody knows the difference. So people are so thrilled with this sort of thing that they fail to ask themselves, well, what happens several iterations down the line when ChatGPT says human beings don't need to be around? Now, mind you, if that happened and human beings were wiped out by AI, extraterrestrial civilizations may very well be overjoyed at this because they say, great, now we can just take the planet with ease. However, the issue here is that artificial intelligence would not stop at just quote unquote regentrifying this planet, but it would actually become space going, or spacefaring, I think is the correct word, and start to proceed to replicate this on other planets out there in this galaxy. And this is something that extraterrestrial civilizations would never stand for. And before it got to that point, they themselves would wipe everything off this planet in order to eradicate artificial intelligence. This is something that human beings don't look at. However, the reason that human beings don't look at it is not just because of laziness. It's not just because they wish to get a competitive or strategic advantage over other nations. It's because the Nebu Gray themselves actually push the development of artificial intelligence for their own nefarious purposes. So
Yeah.
there are actually some military remote viewers out there who specialize in out of body traveling and espionage based on the ability to leave their body and view things remotely, who have talked in detail already back in the early 2000s that the Nebu Gray were planting artificial intelligent computer systems under the ground in many places around the planet, so that when human beings do develop AI to a certain level, then they can hijack the artificial intelligence and use it themselves. And it won't be for the benefit of humanity. And when people hear these stories like, oh, military remote viewers, out of body experience, what sort of science fiction is this? Well, it's important to realize that the United States military actively funds and uses remote viewers in order to gather intelligence on a military level. And there are many books that have been written by former, now retired US military officers of a very high rank who ran these projects and talk about them, because a lot of them have been declassified at this point. So again, if remote viewing is hocus pocus, I don't think that the US military would be pouring so much money into developing these assets in the same way that I do not believe that NASA would be writing laws governing your interaction with extraterrestrials if they did not exist. So in that regard, I think it's very important to look at some of the findings of remote viewers. And that's not to say that remote viewers are 100% accurate, or that they cannot be thrown off track by the technology of extraterrestrials who would enable them to see anything they would want them to see. But I think it is of definite interest to note that they did report that the Nebu Gray were planting artificial intelligence devices inside the planet for a long time already in anticipation of the development of AI. So I think that these are things that are very important, and people should be aware of them. And again, this is in the last harvest for a reason.
Yeah. 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 With Chat GPT, I used it once. I asked only one question, and yeah, I got the usual yada 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 yada. It's a conspiracy theory, blah blah blah. Then I knew who programmed it, and that was it. I prefer to research differently. Um, but are the Nebo Grays the only ones that are using artificial intelligence?
Well, artificial intelligence is employed throughout the galaxy by many extraterrestrial groups. However, the development of their artificial intelligence was done with a lot more wisdom than, let's say, the way human beings develop the artificial intelligence. Uh, so I think this is
So
a
they have
is
safety features in there.
Right. Well, they of course had the conversations that humans didn't have. Well, prior to developing this, what's the worst that could happen, and how do we develop these systems so that the worst does not happen? Whereas human beings have had zero conversations about this. There've been a couple researchers in the AI community who have expressed very grave concerns about the unrestricted development of AI, and urged Congress that standards be put in place for its development. And this never happened. So this is a big issue.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it is a big issue. AI, definitely. I totally agree. And I also agree that a huge majority completely underestimates what could happen. Yeah.
Yes,
And,
totally.
and is that one of the main reasons why other races despise us?
Well, I mean, there are actually quite a few reasons, but
Mm.
I don't think it's that our unrestricted development of AI that causes them to despise us. I think it causes them to be extremely concerned because, as I mentioned earlier, such an unrestricted AI system could easily cause problems and threaten them. So naturally, this is something that they keep an eye on.
Hmm. Yeah. So a centralized government in general, I have nothing against it, but not the one that they are planning here. Yeah.
I
Uh,
agree with you on that because with a new world order is not the same thing as a one world government.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And but let's say if you have, let's say, multiple societies, multiple planets within one empire, um, it is imaginable that sooner or later maybe there will be dissent. You know what I mean? Did alien races develop a better system to communicate or diplomacy? So so how do they do that? If let's say there is all of a sudden uh, two or three planets that say, nah, we don't want that, or is that not happening?
Well, certainly, if one reads The Last Harvest, one will see that much of galactic history has been uh, about warfare. So
Mm.
clearly, despite having one world governments and the like, there were always going to be issues in creation where various groups are not getting along because in the end what we have in the universe is we have a ever growing population of extraterrestrials or biological life forms and a limited amount of resources. So for example, in the last harvest we talk in great detail about the uh, the Verdant Empire, which is another extraterrestrial group, and the Verdant's population is in the like 500 trillion. That's how many of them exist, and one could say that there's one of their strategies is to overwhelm by sheer numbers. Uh, so, but either way, it's an issue when you have 500 trillion members of a particular species, and they have their own federations that are active, and they become a competition. And so the Nebel Gray are not the only alien group that's looking at this planet. So, actually, according to Philip Kraft, who was a 25-year veteran journalist for the Los Angeles Times, he had written a book chronicling his own abductions called "The Contact Has Begun," and he talks in great detail about being adopted by the Verdants to be part of uh, their program for winning the hearts and minds of human beings, so to speak. And so the issue that comes up here is one of the things in the last harvest, one of the many things that's unique is that it explains some of the real reasons why the events of September 11th occurred. And that was because the Verdants had actually planned to finally reveal themselves to humanity and make a bid for the planet. So the idea would have been, well, we can use our technology to turn your deserts into lush green paradises, and we can fix some of the problems of inequities and wealth because we see on the planet that 1% of the population controls 99% of the wealth, and so many people have next to nothing. So they were planning to make a play on the planet. And of course, the Nebu Gray are not thrilled with that. So the events of 9/11 were occurred, and in order to dissuade them from making their appearance. And in the works of Philip Kraft, he goes into great detail about the Verdants and what their strategies were and this sort of thing. And so the idea is that many extraterrestrial species look at this planet and they see it as a place with very valuable resources. The only issue is that we're here and we're in the way.
Yeah. Um, okay, you could also look at this after 9/11. You know, it's the best time to reveal ourselves because obviously you need help, you know. So what was it exactly what made them stay away?
Well, there are several reasons why extraterrestrials cannot easily intervene with what's going
Mhm,
on this planet. And one of the reasons is that the Nebu Gray and the few rebellious reptilians from the Siakar Empire who have taken over this planet, they are impossible to extricate without an enormous amount of collateral damage, because for them this is like their Alamo. I know you're German, so maybe you're unfamiliar with the
yeah,
Alamo.
I
And
know what
right,
it
okay,
is.
so this is their last stand. They have nowhere left to go. If they would not be allowed off this planet because other groups would go after them. So they're here, and they're surrounded by enemies, and they're dug in. And to get them out, it would be incredible collateral damage. So you can't just go in there and say, okay, well, we're going to free you from their grip, because,
So
like I
in other
said,
words, they are underground.
yes, the planet Earth is hollow, like all planets are, and there's a
Mhm,
whole world inside the planet, and in between the part of the planet that's hollow and the surface, there's also massive subterranean areas. So the elite have been constructing already for the last 50 years, base upon base upon base. They have entire cities underground with magnetic levitation trains crisscrossing underground the planet. They have, from their point of view, they don't really care if there is a nuclear war, if there's a famine, if there's a plague, if there's a massive solar event, because from their perspective, they will be safe hiding under the ground. So most of the extraterrestrial craft that people see, they don't actually come from out in space. They come from actually inside the hollow earth.
mhm, yeah. Um, how do you see in this context the probably noticed that it got very popular again, flat Earth movement. Um, do you think this has been influenced as well?
It is certainly a possibility. I wouldn't rule it out. I've also asked myself why in recent years people have become so obsessed with the notion that the earth is actually flat,
Mhm,
uh, when it isn't. But my suspicion, and it's just my personal speculation, is that I feel that a lot of people realize on some deep instinctive level that something is very wrong on the planet, and they don't know what it is. And so they tend to gravitate towards movements which would promise to reveal something that everyone thought was one way, but it's actually the other. And this again is another reason why The Last Harvest was written, was to show people exactly what is wrong and why and how.
mhm,
And so that's another great reason to read this book or to listen to the audiobook, is because it answers that nagging feeling that something's wrong. It says you're correct, this is what's really going on, and so you have a reason to feel the way that you do. So again,
mhm,
I don't know for sure whether extraterrestrial groups like the Nebu Gray were promoting this idea of hollow earth, because there certainly is a lot of disinformation that is intentionally put out there. But it's also a strong possibility this is just the natural human reaction to trying to consciously explain something that they feel on an unconscious level.
mhm. Yeah, okay, that could be a reason. Yeah. Um, what is our biggest misconception about vampire?
Well, most of our quote unquote conceptions about vampires are based on Hollywood films, which
Yeah.
are not exactly based on reality.
Mm,
This idea that they are vampiric beings out there in the universe is a reality, and I think that, for example, when you look at popular cultural references like the film franchise called Underworld, which starred Kate Beckinsale, that
mhm,
that movie covered the science fiction story about a conflict between werewolves and vampires, or as they call them, vampires and lycans in the series. And that story is loosely based on the struggle between the Wolf and Anunnaki Empire and the reptilian Siakar Empire, because the concept of the werewolf is actually taken from the countenance and behavior of this alien group called the Wolfen, which come from the Sirian system, whereas the concept of the vampire is loosely based on a certain class of reptilians that would be coming from the Orion Aryan Siakar Empire. So just like historically, the history of humanity is actually based on the conflict that was between these two empires that were forced to come together to defend themselves from a third extraterrestrial group. Uh,
mm,
though that story finds itself retold in mythology. So if one simply were to look at the vampires as reptilians and the lycans or the werewolves as the wolfen, then the story that is told in Underworld begins to make a lot more sense. And even in the Underworld film franchise, as the franchise progresses through the various iterations of the film, one sees this concept of hybridization. What happens when you combine a vampire with a werewolf, and what are the properties and the traits of that being, and how does it affect the balance of power? And this ties into the concept of hybridization, which is also covered in The Last Harvest, because there's this general idea that if you hybridize a being, you can optimize it for particular tasks. You can take the best traits from one being and the best traits from another and combine them and produce something that perhaps would be biologically more suitable for whatever the required task would be. So many of these stories of vampires and werewolves and other so-called mythical beings, they're either loosely based on actual extraterrestrials and extraterrestrial contact, or they're based on the idea that in the earlier days of this planet, there was so much genetic engineering going on. And you hear all the time in the Bible stories of the Nephilim and the giants, and that human beings were breeding with beings that were not native to this planet and producing what you could call abominations, and that this brought upon the flood to help wipe a lot of these creatures off the planet. So many of these stories of these beings actually go back to actual biological forms that were on this planet, which were engineered by either Enki, who also went under the name of Lucifer, and Enlil, who was simply Enlil, who was a wolf and Anunnaki prince. And these two were at odds with each other, while at the same time they were in charge of running this planet. And both sides were genetically creating all kinds of beings, again, without any sort of regard for what would happen to these beings, or what their life would be like, or what the impact on the planet would be. The Last Harvest goes into great detail about how the various races were created. And speaking in generalities, without getting into any specific race, all human beings, regardless of race, were created by Enki, otherwise known as Lucifer, who was a geneticist from the reptilian Siakar Empire, and he combined the DNA of the native humanoid population with the genetic material of dead reptilian species. So each race had a different reptilian species as the foreign genetic reptilian component, and that this produced various characteristics that are with the races that makes them different. And when he was doing this, he wasn't necessarily doing it with the idea of what is in the best interests of these creatures that he's making, what ended up being humanity, but a lot of times he was making them just to use them as a pawn in his struggles against Enki, and Enki was doing similar sorts of experimentation. And a lot of this actually led to events such as the fall of Atlantis, because a lot of these hybridized beings simply started to take over. They started to infiltrate and take over and then carry out their own agendas. So the creation of what we would call the Illuminati and the Freemasons actually has a historical basis in these sort of hybridized entities and their offspring and what became of them, because not all of them died when Atlantis sank under the ocean, and not everyone was drowned in the flood. So a lot of these beings, they continue to perpetuate themselves in one way or another, and this has had a huge impact on the development of the human race. And this is also another very important thing that the last harvest brings out, which is this idea of a subconscious mind that human beings have, which was made very popular by psychiatrists such as Freud. It doesn't exist in other extraterrestrial species. It's actually unique to human beings, and it was created purposefully by Lucifer because he wished to have a so-called software backdoor in the human mind in order to control the human population remotely and to influence them to do his bidding. So this has had quite an impact on human beings, because while human beings have free will, that one could easily say that this free will has been compromised to a certain degree, because if someone has the ability to be influenced so easily, and it's not just Lucifer who would be capable of influencing them, but even today, the Nebu Gray can easily influence any politician. And this is part of the way in which they control the planet, because they can mass program people to do all sorts of things. When one looks at human beings and how they behave, let's say in groups, like how can a leader like an Adolf Hitler or Donald Trump come out there and everyone just blindly follows them and thinks that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, even if they have 90 indictments on them, even if they're scheduled to go to jail, even if they write books planning to commit genocide? How can it be that human beings go so easily into this direction? And one of the reasons is because they are so easily influenced. And unless a human being makes a special effort to be conscious, then his free will has a chance of being compromised in this manner. So again, this is very important information, and it's unique. No, everyone knows about the subconscious mind. They've all talked about it. Everyone knows Sigmund Freud and his theories, but no one ever wonders, well, where did the subconscious mind come from? Well, the last harvest actually answers it, explains how it works, how it was created, what its purpose is. And naturally, someone can read that and say, well, this is speculative. What's your proof that this is the way it is? And that's a good question. I don't know to what degree it can be proven, but I think when read and consumed in context of all the other information in the last harvest, I think that it will resonate with a lot of people and give them a lot of insight, especially in these coming times as things start to speed up. And we see this in America with and I'm not political. I don't have any particular political leanings. I view all politicians as controlled by the Nebu Gray and not working in anyone's interests except those of the Nebu Gray. However, when one looks around in the United States, for example, and sees what's going on with Trump, it certainly provides a lot of insight as to explain how and why these sorts of things can happen. So, and it explains a lot of things throughout history that otherwise would not have a proper explanation, other than to simply say, well, people are crazy, which really, it doesn't answer the question. If someone says, for example, why do birds fly south for the winter? And someone says instinct, well, that is a correct answer, but what exactly is instinct? Can we know a little more about it? So this is a similar sort of idea where you can say, well, people are crazy, correct, but there's also something deeper to it. Well, why are they crazy? How are they crazy? Well, here's an example of where the subconscious mind really came from. So this again is an example of some of the information in the last harvest that's completely unique and very important. And I think anyone who reads this or who listens to even me talk about this now will understand that there's a reason why all this history has to be brought up, whether people accept it or not, because it's giving human beings the context to really understand where they are.
Mm-hmm.
How many, you look at the attraction that people have for certain sorts of spiritual movements that promise to for example correct the programming in you, the trauma-based programming that is influencing your current life. When people say, oh, why do you keep attracting a certain type of partner or whatever, and there's all these books out there on this topic, and no one ever says, well, where did all this come from to begin with? Why do I have a subconscious mind I'm not in control of? So I think this is very important.
Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering right now if this artificially induced subconscious that we have, mm, if that is part of um, the problem why a lot of humans like to be saved. You know what I mean? The savior program, be it a religious savior, a political savior, that is very, very pronounced in humans.
Correct. Right. We see this again in the United States most recently with Donald Trump, this idea that he's going to be the savior who is going to take America back to some sort of idealistic past which never really existed to begin with, or uh, and the last harvest goes into great detail about this idea of a savior. Where did it come from? And again, this idea of a savior is specifically created by various extraterrestrial civilizations in order to keep people under control. Um, so the reality is that there is no savior. It's up to you. It's all about, again, your relationship with, I know you don't want to hear it, the Divine Father who created you. And
Mhm.
no one is going to absolve you of your sins.
No.
You can't go through life doing terrible things all the time that have very unfortunate consequences and simply say a couple Hail Marys or confess in a vestibule and you're all good now. It just doesn't work like that. That would be a very unfair creation and it wouldn't make any sense. So there are consequences for actions, but people like the idea of a savior because it absolves them of the responsibility to grow spiritually, which is one of the driving directives in creation, is that beings need to evolve and acquire wisdom and become more, so to
Mm.
speak. And so yeah, we're in 100% in agreement with that. And this is certainly not something that a lot of people would like to hear, because look at the popularity of religions like Christianity, for example, which brings forth this idea that, well, there's the savior and you really don't have to do much of anything other than say, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me, and and you're good to go. And it's worked very well to acquire a very large following because it's offering a sort of get out of jail free card. So
Yeah.
it would be interesting to point out that nowhere else in the universe is anyone a Christian or a Muslim or practicing Judaism. This is some of them may have heard of these concepts, but no one is certainly aligned with that sort of thing. That's something that's unique to the planet Earth, and again, has all been instituted for the sake of controlling of the human population. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. And you can divide people by that as well, because what
yes,
has happened here on earth in the name of religion, that is outrageous.
certainly. I mean, how many wars have we had on religion, with the Crusades, the Inquisition, and I think in one of the major 10 commandments is thou shalt not kill, and here you are in the name of your religion going out and doing nothing but killing and torturing. So that right there is a bit of a contradiction, to put it very conservatively. So yes, of course, religion has many purposes, and the idea of a savior has many purposes, and it has to do with dividing people, creating wars and conflicts, and also just keeping people under control and separated from their creator.
Yeah. I, here in Germany, I don't know if you follow such things. Just briefly, there is a political party here in Germany that is relatively new. It's not that new. And I see that time and again in comment sections where people say, only this party can save us. Yeah, something along those lines. And every time I read that, and it is not that I particularly hate this party, but I read it and then I think, my goodness, can you finally grow up and understand that it all stands and falls with you? There is no political party that can rescue you. It's really frustrating. But, by the hundreds, yeah, you read comments like that. Hmm.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's always anything that encourages people to not have to do the work and have someone else do the work for them. It's obviously very attractive to people.
Yeah. So briefly circling back to the vampires, usually what in pop culture we have this idea that they are actually dead. Where's that coming from?
Uh,
Or or is
I,
that just fantasy?
yeah, like I said earlier, a lot of what is in Hollywood films is human fantasy or embellishment. These stories are loosely based uh, on fact. An example, for example, we see this over and over in mythology. I can give you another example. In Greek mythology, they often talk about a group of beings called the Keres, and they would descend upon battlefields and uh, consume the warriors who had fallen in battle, and this sort of thing. And this is viewed as a myth, that this is something that Homer, for example, made up. But in actuality, that group was an extraterrestrial group, and they did in fact feed upon uh, those who fought and died in battle. And people in ancient times, they were aware of them. They could see them. So over time, this turns into a myth, and people think, oh, Homer made this up. Same with the idea of the Valkyries in Norse mythology. But at one time, like I said earlier, a lot of these mythological quote unquote beings were either genetic creations of extraterrestrials or extraterrestrials themselves who were interacting with human beings. There's certainly not when you look at the reliefs and walls of temples in India, you will clearly see flying spacecraft on the wall and things like this. So where did that come from? I mean, clearly they must have been seeing those types of craft. So I think that over time, a lot of things, they fall into the realm of story and myth, and of course they'll also be embellished and modified many times since then. So what started out as some sort of very simple event can become a very complicated event over time, because everyone has added to the story. Because human beings do like stories, right? They like books and they like movies, and so people have to get creative. Each time they add a little something, and pretty soon you're dealing with a mythology that is mostly fantasy, but loosely based on something that was real at one time. So
Mm.
the Last Harvest goes into vampirism and a lot of the history of it. So if someone's interested in that sort of thing, they're certainly it's another reason to read the book. It's not how I would promote the book because it's not of particular importance, I feel, or relevance to human beings and what they face.
Mm,
However, it's in there just because it's part of the context that it's something that is deemed that people need to be aware of. But
yeah.
it's probably not something to dwell upon. Although whatever will get people to read the book is fine. The main point is that people read the book and they're exposed to all the information that's in there. So
Mm,
sometimes you have to attract them by talking about lightsabers and Death Stars. Other times, perhaps you have to talk to them a little bit about vampires and werewolves. So as long as it motivates them to read the book, um, I'm happy with it.
yeah. So in other words, when you said ancient temples in India, I was thinking we find it in ancient Egypt and the Persian Empire. These not only depictions, sometimes statues, where you
Yes,
have a animal body and a human head, or vice versa.
correct.
And uh, so, would you say at one point all these genetic experiments really existed here?
Probably a large number of them did. Again, without actually being alive at that time, it, it's it's possible that some of these statues or images were embellished to a degree, but for the most part, you're correct in what you say that many of these beings did exist, or to be more technical about it, I would say that the idea of hybridized life forms that we would not recognize or be shocked by at one point were rather common. One of the most simple examples of this is the humble pig that we have on this planet. Well, the pig has an incredible amount of human DNA in it. That's one of
Mm,
the reasons you can take a pig's heart and transplant it into a person. It's the reason the study of fetal pigs is done to understand human children. The psychology of a pig is very similar to a human infant. There's a lot of parallels between the pig and the human being. And one would ask the question, of course, well, where did an animal that looks nothing like a human acquire this amount of human DNA from? So the obvious answer is that somebody was conducting experiments, and the pig is perhaps one of the surviving results of some of that experiment or a byproduct of that experiment. So there's many reasons why in old religions they have prohibitions against eating pork, and people have different speculations as to why that is so. They may say, well, the hog is an unclean animal, it has parasites, or they don't like the pig because the pig eats dead bodies. But perhaps also another reason is because a lot of these ancient religions were aware that the pig is a chimera of sorts that is really part human itself. So eating
yeah,
it is would be considered distasteful.
yeah. There is a line of thought out there. I cannot prove that the pig is a hybrid between dog and human.
Yeah, I'm not a genetic expert. I couldn't say what it is a hybrid of, but I think it's scientifically been very well documented that there is a lot of human or a significant amount of human DNA that allows for this compatibility between the species when performing implants of organs or organ transplants and when studying the psychological profile of pigs, that they share a lot in common with human beings. So,
Yeah,
and the last harvest goes into some detail about some of these beings that one has heard about and who created them and where they came from. And it was actually the wolf and Anunnaki who were responsible for a lot of the more outlandish, or may I say, irresponsible creations. They were not to say that Lucifer was genetically re-engineering in a responsible fashion either, but it seemed that the wolf and Anunnaki were producing a lot more bizarre beings, and with even less regard for the consequences of their actions. And again, like it's like, and this is part of the reason why Enlil was looked at as God, and he called himself Yahweh and used to impersonate the Divine Father, because to the point of view of a human being on the planet at that time, a being that's 100 million years or more ahead in technology, that is, and genetically engineering life, they look at it almost as a godlike being. But the reality is that they're not actually creating life out of nothing. They're just genetically reassembling and tampering with creations that already exist.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
without having the wisdom to fully necessarily comprehend the consequences of what they're doing. Not as if they appeared to even care based on what is detailed in the last harvest. It seems they were just doing what they wanted.
Hmm. And they can do that. There are no checks and balances.
Apparently they weren't, but then again, there was the flood. So
Mhm.
this
Mhm.
is an example of the Divine Father getting very upset with the tampering with creation. There were a lot of beings being made that were running amok and causing a lot of problems and acting in a way that the Divine Father thought was offensive to his creation. So he wiped them out.
Mhm.
And this is an example of what you call a check and a balance. And
Mhm.
it's not that he doesn't care, because clearly he did care. He had a problem with this. So
Mhm. Yeah, that's another path that we are on, tampering with genetics,
correct.
from AI, where I think that this will not end well. Mm.
No, it can't end well. This whole transhumanist movement, the idea of merging humans with machines, then connecting with AI, which is what Elon Musk is ultimately really promoting. He's not
Mm.
making fancy cars for you to drive around. That's just part of it. His main focus is creating neural circuitry and chips to implant into the brains of human beings, to make them cyborgs for the express purpose of interacting with artificial intelligence and fusing with it. And he has been very vocal about this. On one hand, he will say that he has been going to Congress and lobbying for more restrictions in the development of AI, yet at the same time, he is promoting the very activities that he is railing against publicly. And his excuse for this, or his rationalization for it, is that he says, well, no one's listening to me and AI is going to take over anyway. So our best chance of survival is to meet it halfway by making ourselves cybernetic and reaching out to it, which to me sounds a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah, I would agree. And it doesn't hold water, the argument,
No.
because there is, yeah, no one is listening to me. My goodness. Yeah, get over yourself. Um, but he, I I really don't get it, where this psychological attraction comes from. This merging with a machine. Yeah, well, you could say, um, maybe psychologically, underneath it all, there is a fear of death. And maybe they think that way they can cheat it. I don't know. I thought about this many hours. So what is the drive behind that? Because I don't find it appealing at all to be half machine and half human.
Right. I mean, yeah, I would tend to agree with you that there is probably an aspect of that drive which is related to the idea of circumnavigating death. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's many reasons. There's probably a lot of people who maybe they also don't like the feeling of being human, and they find it emotionally challenging. Look how many people take antidepressants, for example, to numb themselves. So becoming part machine is also another way to numb yourself. I'm sure there are many factors at play, and I'm no psychiatrist, but they all seem to have validity. The one thing we can say for sure, though, is that this is the direction in which people wish to take things. We see nowadays, when you go out on the street, everywhere you go, people are on their cell phone. They spend more
Oh,
time with their consciousness in cyberspace than in reality. And they have headphones that so they always, even if they don't have to look at their phone, they're connected to it. And so we see that human beings, with their free will that they do have, even if the free will is corrupted to a degree, they consistently, the majority of them at least, are making the free will choice that will have consequences that they may not enjoy, but they make that choice. No one put a gun to their head and told them that they needed to spend all their day on the cell phone.
mm,
They could have made the choice to go to the park and play frisbee, or talk to people in real life, engage in normal human contact, but they chose that. So those
yeah,
choices all have consequences, and they are what they are, and there's not much you can do about it other than observe it and make your own decisions.
yeah. I don't even think that the information is so great that is coming out of that thing. I think it's the AI that's in it that is attracting them, you know?
It could very well be. As I said earlier, human beings are very easy to influence if they're not, especially if they're not even remotely paying attention to their own thoughts. And there's that famous saying, know thyself. So
Mhm.
I think a lot of people, they don't have time to hear themselves because they're always interacting with the cell phone. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
how are you going to
plus,
listen to? Yeah,
yeah, plus what I see a lot and a lot of people cannot endure themselves. They
correct.
always have to be mentally distracted. You know what I mean? Um,
Yes.
I I remember when I had to go to hospital, I was really not in good shape. But I remember I threw all my stuff into my bag, and then I was thinking, shall I take a book or not? And then I thought to myself, no, you will make this an experiment if you are able to endure yourself. Yeah, and I did. And I went 6 days without book, without TV. Yeah, I mean, here at home, I don't have a TV as well. But yeah, it was okay because my bed neighbors in the hospital, they didn't watch TV as well, which I found very yeah, very nice, because I hate it if that thing is rambling on in the background 24/7.
Right.
That, yeah. So
Well, so
Damien,
I guess we can safely assume you won't be putting a chip in your head anytime soon.
no, no. I have too many. First of all, I don't want to have that thing, but also I have a lot of questions there as well. What I assume you have to, I don't know, is that it's probably not a perpetuum mobile, so you have to recharge it probably after a while. And how does that even function? I don't think that you will have, a cordia in your head or something. And what happens if it's not properly recharged? Do I stop in the middle of my walk? Is it possible that my normal, let's say, my normal brain is taking over and there are so many things that I don't really know about that thing. So no, I have no desire to get that. Mm-mm.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't have a desire for that either.
Yeah. And if that is what they expect of us, I have to say thanks, but no thanks.
Yes, and that's an example of exercise of your free will.
Yeah, exactly. So Damien, I'm looking at the clock. I can't believe I told you a little bit over an hour. We are almost going on for 2 hours now.
Oh well.
But but yeah, maybe you don't. I liked our conversation, and I'm happy that you came back.
Thank you for
And
inviting me back.
yeah, and yeah. So guys, that was it. Night flight for today. Damien Dumar, and we see you all next time. Stay safe and sound.